Hello, I'm Dr. Harmon, and today we're talking about trauma-informed care. My goal today is to share with you some ideas about trauma-informed care, what it is, and what you might be able to know about it so that you can be more effective with your healthcare delivery. Let's start out by remembering a time in the recent past when you might have experienced a patient coming into either your clinic or your hospital, and the encounter with them inspired some negative emotions on your part. Maybe you felt sad or anxious or angry, and it was excessively difficult to reach them. There was something about the encounter that didn't feel right, and you recognize that to alleviate their suffering, things could have gone better, and you're wondering what it is you could have done. There's a fair chance that if you were not already using a trauma-informed lens, that the encounter may have been a better experience for the patient if you had been using it, and perhaps it would have been a better experience for you as well. Notice I use the word lens. The trauma-informed care principles ask that all of us consider that we're all approaching each situation through our own lens, our own past experiences, the way our brains are wired. The idea is that most of the patients we see at some point in the past have been exposed to some sort of traumatic event that forever shapes and frames the way they approach the world. We're a part of the world, and so it's going to shape and frame the way they approach us. Similarly, all of us in healthcare have experienced life, and life is often full of traumatic type experiences, maybe even PTSD. The healthcare providers are certainly not immune. So when a patient is approaching an encounter through a lens of trauma, and when the healthcare provider or peer support specialist or whoever happens to be encountering this patient has also experienced trauma and is looking through a trauma-informed lens or experiencing the world through that way of understanding things, the odds go up that there can be miscommunication, hard feelings, and it's incredibly difficult to help someone reduce their own suffering when we're not aware of what's happening and we can't confront it and address it adequately. One of the things we know for sure about trauma is that it rewires the brain. There's plenty of studies out there that help us understand that when we experience something that we perceive to be life-threatening or something that attacks our sense of self or integrity, our brain rewires, it learns to adapt, and it becomes either aggressive or defensive. It learns to experience fear, so that fear can inspire certain kinds of behaviors that set us up to basically to be able to survive. But the things that will help you survive a actual traumatic experience are not the same things that will necessarily help improve your life when you are encountering something that might simply remind you of the past trauma or be predictive of a future trauma, when in fact no such new trauma is about to happen. We might assume that, hey, well, what percentage of patients is it that really that have been exposed to past trauma? Is it, is it 10, 20%? Is it maybe a third? Is it a little more than half? It's actually about 70 to 80% of folks in primary care offices have experienced some significant amount of trauma at some point in their life. If you're working on a behavioral health unit, substance abuse recovery unit, if you're dealing with folks who are older and have more lived experience, more opportunity to have an accumulation of trauma, those numbers only go up. When we look at studies in children, children who've experienced trauma have 30 times more behavioral health problems, more problems with learning and difficulty flourishing and becoming fully healthy functioning adults. And those folks, when they turn 18, there's no magic, right? They're carrying that forward with them. And as I mentioned before, in healthcare, we are not immune. We are constantly surrounded by people who are suffering and putting ourselves in difficult situations where we too could experience a significant amount of trauma, either through things that we witness, or maybe even we're assaulted on the job, or our integrity or our life feels threatened on the job. And that's not to say anything about all the life experiences we could have had, whether it's being assaulted in childhood or being in a motor vehicle collision or anything, right? So all these things we carry forward with us. So we need to just go ahead and assume that there's a trauma lens that is happening on both sides, and accepting that and just adopting that idea can be very powerful. So what do we do next then? You know, we assume trauma. Well, the next thing I would like to ask you to do is to think, well, what do you do when you encounter a child who is experiencing emotional dysregulation and has a perceived trauma? What do you do if you're a caretaker for, say, a plant that isn't thriving in your home? With a child, you know what to do, right? It's instinctual. If a child thinks that there's some sort of traumatic event in its world and is having a temper tantrum or a meltdown and is completely dysregulated, the thing to do is to pick the child up, create a safe environment, and be reassuring. That's it. Someone who is traumatized and emotionally dysregulated cannot be reasoned with. It's not about us in that moment. It's about us caretaking and taking care of them. In the same manner, we, remember, are looking through our own trauma lens. We have to be compassionate with ourselves, be curious about what we're experiencing. You know, the anger and sadness, we need to be able to observe it and say, hey, this is happening to me. You know, this is not who I am, it's happening to me. This is a sign that I need to be compassionate with myself. The trauma-informed lens asks us to adopt some mindfulness, whereby we give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves so that we can then take care of others. I mentioned the plant earlier, right? Same thing. You don't judge the plant, right? You decide what it needs so that you can deliver whatever is necessary for it to flourish. It's up to you to figure out, does it need sunlight? Does it need water? Does it need nourishment? It's wilting, right? And so when we approach our own compassion for self and compassion for others with that same mindset, it can be very freeing. It makes it very simple for us to understand what to do next. And it frees us from deciding that we're going to pass judgment on the situation. And instead, we're going to be curious, compassionate, and take appropriate action. And that's it. So leading with the curiosity, right? If we cannot understand what the patient is experiencing if we aren't curious about it. We cannot understand what's happening to ourselves if we're not curious about it. If we're going to decide to act on instinct and impulse through the trauma lens, we're going to basically allow the re-experiencing and the avoidance, which is not what we're called to do when we're trying to take care of others. And that's what allows us to be compassionate, that we have first been curious to give ourselves permission to look at it through that lens and to not internalize the notion. We're not going to run away from the anger by lashing out so that we can get it out and pretend that that's just going to, you know, make everything all better. Of course, it doesn't work. It works in the short term, but it's not helpful for our patients, and in the long term, it's not helpful for us either. Often I have healthcare workers say back to me that they struggle with this idea because they think this is about respect, that part of what we owe to ourselves is to demand a level of respect on the job from the patient. I'm here to say that when you're dealing with an emotionally dysregulated patient who we are charged to be compassionate for, that's not an appropriate way to frame it, because it is not going to allow us to be our best selves and really step forward. Instead, I would ask you to take that idea and choose to reframe it so that you can be more effective in your care delivery. So instead of, I need to be treated with respect, let me suggest this. When we treat ourselves and others with compassion, using a trauma-informed lens, we promote healing, right? So think about that. We promote the healing when we choose to adopt this stance. And it's not about our own needs, but instead it's specifically about our capacity to deliver compassionate care to a patient. So there are some basic guiding principles that can step us through what to do first when we are choosing to engage this trauma-informed lens. It can inform how we set up systems and how we carry ourselves individually. The first thing to consider is just safety, right? So it's really hard to help somebody who is re-experiencing some sort of traumatic event or emotionally dysregulated when they don't feel safe on a basic level. They might be scanning their environment to see where the next threat is coming from. You might be perceived as that threat even. So the first thing to do is to reassure someone, look, we've got the safety down. We are here creating this safe environment so that you can experience whatever it is you need to experience to get through this. And to reassure and show patients what measures are being taken to ensure that they are in fact safe while they are in your care. The second thing is to establish trust and be transparent about process and procedure and how things go. If there are some challenging and uncomfortable things in your environment, own up to that, talk about it, be very free about it. This is, we're not here to sell a retail product that we're trying to promote as something maybe greater than it is. We have what we have, and we want the patient to be on that journey in a way that they can appreciate. We want them to appreciate the authentic experience, and we want to be on the journey with them, right? And so these uncomfortable things are shared, and we're a part of that, and that can really go a long way for establishing trust. And then we're going to acknowledge and be a little humble or a lot humble that there's so much we can't do. Pulling in peer support can be way more powerful than anything we could give in terms of healthcare delivery in the form of a pill or a clinical recommendation muffin. Sometimes it's a call to a friend. Sometimes it's a peer support specialist that happens to work on your unit. It might be a phone number to call, a support line for people who have experienced something similar to what your patient happens to be experiencing. So we're not going to act as if, through typical Western medicine, we have all the answers. We're going to acknowledge that there are lots of things that this patient might need that we don't necessarily have in healthcare systems, but we're going to link them to these other services, these people, these processes, these phone numbers, websites, locations where they can access the kind of support that they couldn't get otherwise. And we're going to collaborate. We're going to be mutually respectful. We're going to level the playing field when it comes to trauma-informed care, right? So it doesn't matter if it's the receptionist or the chief medical officer. One of the things we're going to do is help the patient understand that everyone has an equal voice and how this way of understanding their recovery is deployed. And if you see someone suffering and requiring a trauma-informed lens, it's on all of us to speak up, right? So this is not something that the physician delivers and nobody else does. This is not something that's tasked out to the nurse and nobody else does. It has to be a philosophy that's delivered across the board. And anyone at any level at any time can speak up and say, I think this person is suffering because of this thing in this way. I think if we created a more safe environment, I think if we pulled in a peer support specialist, I think if we were more transparent about our process and take ownership for doing that. And then we want to help patients feel empowered and have choice, whatever it is, even if all it is to say, do you want to turn left or right? Would you prefer a blanket? Would you like to make a phone call? Sometimes when people are very sick, they feel cornered. Maybe if it's a behavioral health patient on a commitment, they feel trapped. That doesn't mean they don't have some autonomy, they don't have choices. We can make it clear that they do have choices and put them in front of them. It really helps for a person to feel that they're being treated with dignity when their choices are acknowledged, laid before them, and then honored. So that can go a long way. And then lastly, we never want to forget cultural issues, gender-specific issues, issues related to maybe language barriers or ethnicity. We want to be curious about these things, and we want to listen to our patients, and we want to pull in experts who might have a different way of understanding things, who can really help us take advantage of this knowledge that they have so that we can help the patient feel all these things: the safety, the trust, the support, that they have. They're empowered and their voice matters. So here's what I'd like you to do. Here's 4 very credible sites that have a lot of good information on trauma-informed care. The CDC, SAMHSA, the NIMH, which is part of the NIH, NAMI, the first 3 being government agencies, the last one being a nonprofit organization made up of family members who want to support those with mental health problems. Go to any one of their sites, put in their search bar, trauma-informed care, and you're going to get all kinds of things. Web pages that explain, how to get appropriate training, PDF downloads about specific populations and how to understand trauma-informed care. There's CME courses you can take. There's seemingly no end to the amount of information that you can consume on this topic. So I'd like to ask you to pick one, CDC, the NIH, whichever one. Go to their website, type in trauma-informed care, see what it pulls up, pick one pamphlet maybe or one web page, and just continue your education on this topic. There's a ton I haven't consumed. Every single time I download something or attend a CME lecture course on trauma-informed care, I seem to pick up something new. Every day there's new literature being published on the topic. So it's a non-threatening, very well researched way to deliver care to our patients that seems to help many, many people and hurt almost no one. You really can't go wrong. So I'm excited to think that you're going to take action on this. I'm excited to imagine that you're going to use that trauma-informed lens to deliver more compassionate and more effective care to the patients that you take care of. And thank you for going on this journey with me. I appreciate you taking it into consideration. So thank you very much.